You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit the voluntary life. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Now here's your host, Jake.
That was excellent. And
me, Stephanie.
And here's my guest, Stephanie. Hi, it's Jake here. I'm really, really pleased to welcome Stephanie, who you probably know her voice very well from the intro, a friend of mine, to talk today about Bitcoin. Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, Jake. It's so fun to talk with you today. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. And so, yeah, I wanted to do an episode on Bitcoin, and you were definitely the first person I thought about talking about it. And the reason I wanted to do this is because obviously Bitcoin has been in the news a lot, and there's a lot that's been talked about Bitcoin. But I wanted to really talk about it in terms of how people can use it themselves and what the opportunities are for really getting started in Bitcoin. And I know that you have a lot of experience on this, and maybe it would be helpful to start off just by sort of explaining how you got involved in using Bitcoin and what your sort of background is with Bitcoin.
Yeah, oh my. I think maybe even a good place to start would be to back up even further and say, what actually is Bitcoin if somebody has never, ever heard of it before?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So yeah, why don't we start with that? So how would you explain Bitcoin to people who've never heard about it?
Okay, so the elevator pitch, the hook is, imagine if you took some gold and added a teleporter to it so that you could send it instantly anywhere in the world. And this teleporter was very low cost, so, optional transaction fee of a few pennies. And then you made it infinitely divisible, like very easy to divide the gold or put it back together, merge it. There's really no denomination of 1 ounce of gold, and you can't break it apart. That's basically what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin is a payment network, so it is basically a peer-to-peer decentralized network that allows you to send payments in the form of Bitcoins anywhere in the world instantly, or pretty much instantly. You have to wait for the network to confirm that the transaction has gone through, which takes, not very much time, 20 to 30 minutes or something like that. But you can send payments and receive payments from anywhere in the world. It is irreversible, so you can't do chargebacks like you can with credit cards or some other things in the legacy banking system. And by the way, Bitcoiners refer to conventional banks, credit cards, PayPal, fiat currencies as the legacy banking system, which has a lot of problems associated with it that some people don't like and cause, frankly, a lot of headaches for people. So Bitcoin is designed to be basically a medium of exchange, and also, I guess you could say, in some ways, a store of value. And it's basically money 2.0, and it's based on math. So this is based on, it's called a cryptocurrency. So it's based on cryptography, which lends security to it, as well as, this is a basis for what they are. So Bitcoins are basically, they exist on virtually. You can get a physical object that has a code on it that allows you to access Bitcoins online, but they live on the internet. So this isn't really something you hold in your hand, except if it's like a physical representation of this online thing. So I think, does that explain it, Jake?
I think that's a really, really good summary of Bitcoin. Really excellent way of explaining it. And what strikes me when you explain it like that is just what a great example Bitcoin is of criticizing by creating. Because I mean, you talked about gold, and we've had decades of economists criticizing fiat money by saying, we really ought to be on a gold standard, and this is a problem with money printing, and this is all going horribly wrong. And it's had very little impact whatsoever. Bitcoin is a critique of fiat money by actually creating and effectively a new type of gold standard. It's obviously not gold. It's based on the artificial scarcity of bitcoins, But I think that's a
Yeah,
wonderful, wonderful example of how effective it is and how much more impact you make when, rather than just saying what's wrong with something, you actually provide a critique by creating something better.
yeah, I definitely love that point, and it's totally true. And, I said that Bitcoin was like gold on purpose because, like gold, Bitcoin has no central authority. Gold is found in the earth and it can be discovered or mined, and you can get gold that way or by purchasing it or trading it for something else from somebody. And Bitcoin is the same way. There's the way that Bitcoins are created. There's no mint for Bitcoins. There's no central bank that issues Bitcoins. They are created as a reward for your computer or a miner's computer, a Bitcoin so-called miner's computer, solving math problems. And in doing so, they confirm Bitcoin transactions and create the Bitcoin payment network. And as a reward for doing that, they're when they do something called solve a block or find a block, which the Bitcoin payment system has basically a public ledger called the blockchain, which is made up of blocks that show every transaction that's ever taken place on the Bitcoin network. As a reward for confirming those transactions and creating the network, you can get bitcoins. It's called a block reward. So they're mined and they're discovered in the same way as something like gold, and there's no central issuing authority. And that's, I think, one of the most important things about Bitcoin, because, it is a real critique, that there are certain people who essentially, are affiliated with governments around the world, and they have a lot of control over the money that most people use every day. So why
Yeah, the
not
central banks.
decentralize? Yeah, yeah, and so why not decentralize that control? And that is in fact what Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonym of the creator of Bitcoin, wanted to do. He wanted to give people more autonomy and control over their money.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how this develops. And obviously, nobody knows exactly how it's going to develop. But as countries experience monetary crises, and they happen all the time, all over the world, and Argentina is currently going through one, and obviously Zimbabwe went through one a while ago. There is this other alternative that is now there, which is for people, if they can actually exchange, and we're going to come on to that, but for people to get their savings into Bitcoin, and that's going to be a really interesting new opportunity for people in countries where they are having their currencies debased, to actually avoid the fallout from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know you were recently in Argentina, Jake, and you saw some of these things firsthand, that there was an official enforced exchange rate as part of the currency controls that was not the actual market exchange rate. So that created a lot of arbitrage opportunities for people and possibly some unsafe conditions for people trying to exchange their money for a fair rate. And also a lot of difficulty getting currency in and out of the country. And with Bitcoin, you don't have any of those problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no way to impose capital controls on taking money in and out of a country if people are using Bitcoin. There are ways to, I guess, really mess with people's use of Bitcoin, especially by controlling the exchanges, and we will come on to talk about that. But I think that's a very nice sort of brief summary of what Bitcoin is. And in fact, this is a field that's moving really quickly. But if someone wants to get a better understanding of just like the basics of Bitcoin and the kind of how Bitcoin works, how the blockchain works, and so forth, where would you suggest that they go to sort of look at more on that?
Yeah, there are actually a number of great websites that have short explainer videos. So the one that I am most familiar with and would recommend is weusecoins.org. And there you're going to find like a quick 2-minute video that explains the basics of Bitcoin in an entertaining format.
Awesome. How did you get involved in using Bitcoin yourself?
Yeah, so back in 2011. Bitcoin has been around since I think 2009. That was when Satoshi published the white paper about what Bitcoin was and kind of just dumped it on the web. It was not a traditional academic publishing, even though now he's regarded as a genius. And, this is like a really important thing that he just kind of casually posted on the web and then sort of help
Disappears.
people, yeah, disappeared, help people understand it enough until he could kind of tiptoe away. So it has this mystique along with the insane range of uses and things you could do with it. But so that was, several years ago. And I first found out about it when I was on a radio program. It's called Free Talk Live. And it's a daily radio show, and it's syndicated on terrestrial radio here in the U.S. And it's also online. They have a podcast. It's at freetalklive.com, and I'm a host of Free Talk Live on Sundays. And at one point, Ian and Mark, who are the main hosts of Free Talk Live, somehow got involved with some libertarians who were really excited about Bitcoin and who got in on the ground floor. And specifically, that was Gavin Andresen, who is now the lead developer for Bitcoin. Actually, he works for the Bitcoin Foundation, and then he pretty much works full time on coding and developing for Bitcoin, which is open source, by the way, so anybody can see what's going on there. And also Roger Ver, who has the nickname Bitcoin Jesus. And because he was very evangelical about Bitcoin, he purchased a billboard in, I think, 2010 or 2011 in Silicon Valley saying, we accept Bitcoins for his business, Memory Dealers, which sells, memory and other electronics. And Roger had actually purchased these physical bitcoins. They're called Casasius coins, and they're made by this guy, Mike Caldwell. He calls himself Casasius because the CASAS stands for call a spade, and then he wanted to like Romanize it, so he made it Casasius.
Right.
So he makes these physical bitcoins. They're like these shiny golden kind of tokens, and on the back they have a key where you can access bitcoins that are stored in an online wallet. So Roger actually gave all the co-hosts of Free Talk Live a 25 bitcoin physical Casasius piece. That was the first Bitcoin that I ever got. And as Jeffrey Tucker will tell you, as he said in a bunch of interviews, the best way to get someone interested in Bitcoin is to make them an owner.
Right.
And suddenly they start paying attention to it really quick. So I got made an owner as a gift, as being part of this radio show. And I got this piece from Roger. At the time, Bitcoins were I think worth about $2 each. And I said, oh, that's cool. He gave me $50. That's pretty awesome. I guess I'll start paying attention to this Bitcoin thing. Well, I started paying attention, and I saw them, spike up to about $30 per Bitcoin in June of 2011 or somewhere around there in the summer there. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. And then I started, following a little more. They went back down to about $4. They went back up. They hit 10. They hit 20. They hit 70. They hit 100. And pretty soon they were up at, $260 per Bitcoin. And, I felt very wealthy with that 25 Bitcoin piece.
Yeah.
So really becoming an owner was how I got interested in it. And it was talked about a lot. There's a huge overlap between Bitcoin enthusiasts and libertarians, or Bitcoiners, you might call them. Because I think, frankly, there are lots of people who would describe themselves as libertarians or as anarchists or voluntarists or whatever you want to call yourself, who really see a value in having free money, and free as in liberty, not free as in beer, but free money that is completely decentralized and outside of the control of the Federal Reserve. And a lot of libertarians, at least here in the U.S. where I live, had been sort of trying to get widespread adoption of trading and bartering with silver, or perhaps with gold, but that really has its issues. It's hard to find denominations of silver. Like sometimes you want to buy something that costs $5. So what do? A tenth of an ounce of silver. What if you don't have an exact change? And and you have to be physically present to exchange it with the person. And so it's really, there was really a better system needed. Like that was really kind of a novelty, or that is kind of a novelty. And I'm sure it has its place in a lot of instances. I still have some precious metals myself. But you can do certain things with Bitcoin that you just can't do with precious metals. And one of the biggest ones being, transfer them anywhere, not necessarily have to have the person in your physical vicinity or be willing to ship it.
Right.
So yeah, so I started to see the advantages right away, and I started getting, I guess, just sort of watching and lurking and following libertarians who were involved in Bitcoin. So they talked about it quite a bit on Free Talk Live, which is a show, that I'm involved with as a host and also listen to. And there were some Bitcoin meetups that were forming locally near me in New Hampshire. So I knew some people in the community that were getting interested in Bitcoins. And I started reading a little bit also on the Bitcoin Talk forums. Sometimes I'll check in there. You can find out a lot of information on the forums. So that's basically how I got started with it. And I started taking Bitcoins, I thought, I have my own podcast. It's called Pork Therapy. It's porctherapy.com. And I thought, these Bitcoin things are cool. It couldn't hurt to put up a tip jar on my website. So around, I would say in the summer of like 2011, I started accepting Bitcoins as tips on my website, and I definitely got a few. And at the time, it was like somebody threw me one Bitcoin, and it was like, oh, cool, they sent me $6. And then, then Bitcoin started appreciating, and suddenly I'm thinking, oh, if I get zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, that's a great tip,
Absolutely.
So.
It's interesting because I was just going to say from what you were saying about the kind of community that there was a strong overlap between libertarians and Bitcoiners. I guess you were really right in the heart of probably the biggest concentration of early adopters of Bitcoin. I don't know, maybe even in the world, in New Hampshire. It seems like Bitcoin now is probably reaching out to beyond early adopters, but it seems like that was probably one of the best places to be to kind of get wind of Bitcoin in the early days.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, it helped to have this radio show that was kind of behind it as well, and to know some of these people through the show. But definitely, the in-person community has been around for quite a while, and that was really important.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, I wanted to ask you, one of the things I guess that first comes to mind in talking about getting involved in using Bitcoin is really getting Bitcoin, exchanging your money for Bitcoin. And we can talk about, maybe actually earning Bitcoin, like you talked about with your podcast. But exchanges have been one of the kind of, I guess, unstable aspects of of Bitcoin in this very early stage. If someone's interested in getting involved in Bitcoin, what's the situation now with exchanges where you can trade fiat currency for Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that's the first thing that people want to know when they understand Bitcoin, and then they think, I want some. How can I get some? And then they see exchanges online. So these are basically websites where they're billed, at least, as you can go there and you can find some way to fund your account with US dollars or pounds or whatever your favorite legacy currency is. And then you can purchase Bitcoins on the exchange and perhaps transfer them out of the exchange to your wallet, or you can put Bitcoins into the exchange, sell them on the exchange for some legacy currency, and then transfer that out to, for instance, like a bank account. I mentioned transfer it out because these exchanges right now are notoriously unstable, especially the ones in the U.S. have been really coming up against a lot of these regulations that are put down by the federal government that are supposed to prevent, whatever you want to call it, terrorism, money laundering. Ostensibly, they are for your own safety and for your own good. They're going to prevent you from doing basically any transaction with your bank account and kind of really limit what you can do. And a lot of the US based exchanges, or even exchanges that operate in the US, have had their bank accounts seized, frozen. People with funds in the exchange have gotten screwed. So I would recommend, if you ever use an exchange, do not leave funds in the exchange, whether you're talking about Bitcoins or US dollars or any currency. The exchanges, they can be a way to get Bitcoins, but you're going to have to find one that you trust. And frankly, a lot of them are not professional organizations. They haven't really done everything they need to do or been around for a long time. There are also private hackers. It's not just the government that you have to worry about with exchanges. There are also hackers that can hack exchanges and get funds or get information, passwords. So, use a different password for every exchange because they do go after other exchanges with those things too. And don't leave funds in there. So those are the safety tips I would recommend if you're going to use one of them. And there are other ways to get Bitcoins besides just exchanges, though. And one of them is a service called BitInstant, which allows you to make cash deposits at different locations around North America in particular, and also in other parts of the world. And you can deposit some cash pretty much anonymously, like they ask for some information about your name, but you don't have to give the correct name. I mean, I'm sure not everybody does.
Right.
And then they will send Bitcoins to your Bitcoin address that you specify. They have some other methods of doing so as well. You can use some online banking services like Dwolla to go through BitInstant to get Bitcoins. Sometimes
I thought Dwolla was now not able to do that, or am I mistaken on that?
Dwolla, the Dwolla account for Mt. Gox,
So Mt. Gox
which
was
is
started, right?
yeah, and Mt. Gox is the biggest Bitcoin exchange, although it's quickly being overtaken because, frankly, they have not. They were kind of the only game in town for a while as far as Bitcoin exchanges go, and they are based in Japan. And the name, by the way, stands for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange, which is what they were before they were a Bitcoin exchange.
Right.
But they were kind of the only game in town for a while, but they were constantly down. They were getting DDoSed, and it caused a lot of instability in the Bitcoin price because people were looking to Mt. Gox to see what the going rate for Bitcoin was. And when that website was down or when they were having problems, a lot of people were panic selling and freaking out and all this kind of stuff. Now there are some other exchanges coming out, but the point is that a lot of these exchanges, especially early on, were not super professional, and they weren't ready for the volume and the growth of Bitcoin,
Right.
which started to happen really fast at one point. And I think it was a huge incentive for other exchanges to come about and to jump into the marketplace. And we're still kind of waiting for that to fully realize, but it's starting to happen. And there are more professional exchanges that are coming out that have the capacity to handle a lot of trades, a lot of trading volume, and also are complying with these, onerous, frankly, government regulations and doing what they need to do to make sure they don't get shut down.
Right.
But exchanges, like I said, are not the only way to get Bitcoins. There's a website called localbitcoins.com where you can meet up and hook up with individuals in your local area who may be willing to sell you Bitcoins. And you can do that transaction with a cell phone, or some cash or whatever. You can also find Bitcoin transactions on Bitcoin OTC, which is a sort of a trust network or a reputation network, and it's on IRC, as far as I know. I haven't used that one, but if you're into IRC, then maybe that would be something to look into for you. You can also just find a friend or somebody you know online or somebody in real life and broker a transaction privately with them if they have Bitcoins that they want to sell or buy or whatever. And you can also mine Bitcoins. That's another way to get them. Although mining is difficult, it takes a lot of research, and it's really not for the casual user anymore. But you can also buy shares in mining cooperatives with people who have really heavy-duty mining equipment, just like you might buy in like a gold or silver mining company. You can buy shares in some of these mining co-ops.
Well, I think that's really helpful, especially for people to consider the other options like local bitcoins and so forth. And given that the exchanges are really changing so quickly, is there anywhere that you would suggest for people to kind of keep up to date on, what the sort of latest news is about which exchanges are more or less stable and what's happening?
Oh gosh, yeah. There's not really a central place, I guess, that reports on the status of different exchanges, but I guess I would say the Bitcoin Forum probably accomplishes that purpose best,
Right.
which is bitcointalk.org. And you can watch the post there to see what's going on and sort of get the inside scoop. I mean, there are a number of exchanges that are coming up and services too. There's this service called Coin Flash where they're basically, as a company, they're taking on the risk of regulations and so forth, and they are basically creating little affiliates with stores that have physical locations, where they will post your address of your store on their website, and people can go in and buy bitcoins from that store. That's another service that I would watch because it's new, but it's going to come in. It's probably going to be pretty big. There's an exchange starting called Kraken, who is going to be not just trading bitcoins but other cryptocurrencies as well, and they're like really working hard to make sure they comply with all these laws. They're in public beta right now. Bitstamp is taking a lot of the market share of exchanges right now. A lot of people are going to that one. So those are just some names, I guess, to watch as far as exchanges, but it does change pretty fast. So I would say finding a community who's interested in bitcoins in your local area or online is the best way to keep up to date with those things.
Awesome, awesome. I think probably it's quite a big field to talk about, but I wanted to just ask your thoughts for people getting interested about software and going for an online wallet versus offline, and what are your sort of introductory thoughts about things that you need to consider when getting into to having a wallet and holding Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely something that people want to know. So there's going to be when you're talking about web wallets versus sort of desktop clients or maybe cold storage solutions, there's going to be a trade-off between accessibility of your bitcoins and security. So there was a really popular service for a while, which is now down because of a really horrible hack where they lost everything, called InstaWallet, which basically allowed you to go to their website and in one click you could create a Bitcoin wallet and have it up and running, and you would just bookmark it in your browser. The thing is, there's no security on that. So keeping any more than just sort of pocket change in a wallet like that would not be recommended. You can also have Bitcoins on your phone. There's something called Bitcoin Spinner, and there are lots of Bitcoin apps actually for Android, and Apple actually blocks Bitcoin apps from the Apple Store, but there are some ways around it as far as I understand. There are some other apps that are not only for having Bitcoins on your phone that you can get away with it, or you can jailbreak your iPhone to put those on there.
Well, I
As
didn't
far
know
as
that.
other,
So Apple just blocks all Bitcoin wallet apps.
yeah, I think the real reason is that they, tried to create this payment system, and I think they're just simply trying to shut out competition.
Right.
And I don't think it was a very popular decision. The reason that they gave for blocking these Bitcoin apps from the Apple Store was saying that, all of our apps are required to comply with all local laws, and we can't allow you to have this on there. So, I mean, it was just a BS reason for doing that. And so far, they have stuck with that decision. They haven't unblocked the Bitcoin apps from the Apple Store, as far as I know.
Right.
But if you want a computer-based wallet, there I guess I should mention the original kind of Bitcoin wallet when a lot of people started out was this thing that's sometimes referred to as the Satoshi client or the Bitcoin QT client. And you can download that from bitcoin.org, I think. And that is the original, open source Bitcoin client. And what it is a program you download to your computer, and it has Bitcoin addresses. It has wallets within it. You can encrypt your wallet, so if you lose that password, you won't be able to get your Bitcoins because no
Right.
one else has a copy of it. But it is pretty secure, as far as encryption goes, unless you have like a keylogger on your computer. But, for most purposes, it's pretty good. The only catch is that it downloads the entire blockchain, which is the public ledger of all Bitcoin transactions ever.
Right.
And right now it's up to something like 8 gigabytes or something, and it takes forever to synchronize with the network. So
And
that's
that's only going to keep getting bigger and bigger, isn't it? So,
yeah, absolutely. So I think people are moving away from that. There's another option called the Electrum client, which basically I think stores the blockchain on the cloud, and you can open it up as a program on your computer, but it's a lot lighter kind of interface, a nicer interface, and you can still kind of send and receive bitcoins with it. It's not really a web wallet because it's a program you download to your computer, and it allows you to have a seed phrase. So basically, you can regenerate that wallet from anywhere, and so it's pretty portable, and it doesn't require you to download the whole blockchain. That's something I like. There's also a client called Armory, which is a free program, and that's meant for Bitcoin security. And within Armory, you can have wallets that are offline, that cold storage that can't be accessed from the internet. And you can also have wallets that are online that can be accessed from the internet. So it's kind of a good way to combine security with like ease of use. Then there are paper wallets. There's a website called blockchain.info, which has web wallets on blockchain.info, but it also has a number of other useful features where you can look at any Bitcoin address and see, what transactions have come into and out of that address. You can generate QR codes for any Bitcoin address very easily with blockchain.info. Does a lot of things, but also at blockchain.info, you can do something called create a paper wallet, which means that basically it prints some information, the private key, on a piece of paper. And so effectively what this means is that there's a piece of paper with access to your Bitcoins on it. And you can store that somewhere offline, and it's considered pretty safe because it can't be gotten to by hackers. The problem is you need a fire safe or some way to make sure that
yeah.
piece of paper doesn't get lost or destroyed. So there's that option too. And then there are a number of like security products. Some people have a computer that they dedicate for Bitcoin storage. So for instance, they'll have the Bitcoin QT client or some other client on like a little netbook or something, and they'll put all their Bitcoins on there and just not connect it to the internet very often or at all. You
Right.
can boot an operating system and kind of have at it. And so some people do that. There are lots of different ways. And then when you're talking about bigger volumes of Bitcoin, some people are, just not into doing all the security themselves. And there are some services that will kind of store large amounts of Bitcoins for you in high security. Like there's this one called the Bitcoin Fund. It's almost like a hedge fund for Bitcoins, but basically they have like a Swiss bank vault where they store Bitcoins in cold storage in their vault. And the nice thing about it is that, since there is this blockchain, which is a public ledger of all Bitcoin transactions, you can look at a wallet address and you can see those Bitcoins in there. So you can kind of audit it, like it's very transparent. It's anonymous or pseudo-anonymous. You don't have to attach your identity to your Bitcoin wallet, but it's also transparent and auditable. So it's this cool kind of combination of those features.
That is really cool because it means that you can basically tell whether anybody's spent your Bitcoins that are supposed to be in a Swiss vault.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the very interesting thing about some of these high profile hacks, like there have been a lot of exchanges and web wallet services. I think My Bitcoins was one of them, and TradeHill got hacked. Mt. Gox has gotten hacked. I mean, all these websites have gotten hacked at some point or another if they've been around long enough, it seems. InstaWallet hacked. And there was somebody who did a study, because when these sites get hacked, you can see their Bitcoins being transferred to some address or some number of addresses.
Right.
But the interesting thing that happens after that is these high profile hacks, pretty much none of those Bitcoins have ever been moved. They go to some address, but then they don't move. And so is that because the criminals or the crooks or the thieves are afraid of being caught by the exchanges if they try to, cash out these Bitcoins or if they try to send them somewhere else? Or is it because they're holding on to them because they think they'll be more valuable in the future? Nobody really knows.
It's got to
So
make
it,
spending stolen bitcoins pretty difficult if it's given that they appear in in the blockchain.
right. Right, absolutely. So there kind of is this sort of layer of security built into it, and some people have even suggested that at some point there might be like a pool of tainted bitcoins that have been involved in theft, and a pool of clean bitcoins that people know that it's okay to accept, and that the digital nature of bitcoins makes it easy to track that.
Well, you would think that actually there would be a service there that you could effectively register your bitcoins as stolen and then have it as available as a something that people could check to see whether
Yes,
they're
absolutely.
accepting stolen bitcoins. Obviously, there's a potential for someone to fraudulently claim that they were stolen and so forth, but
Right.
it really is an interesting. But there are lots of potential opportunities there.
It's a new realm. It's been described as like the Wild West and compared to a gold rush even, and that's an accurate comparison in some ways. But this is a decentralized currency, and the market needs to come up with solutions to give people better security and traceability of bitcoins that were stolen potentially. And I think it's really doing that pretty well.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I think there's a lot more that could be said on the technical side of things, but that's a really helpful overview of the software and also of storage. But I do want to talk about, I guess, the most fun aspect of Bitcoin, which is buying and selling, and what you can effectively do. Because I mean, this is the interesting thing about Bitcoin is it's not just like gold, it's also like cash, and because it is a currency. So, what's your overview of the Bitcoin economy at the moment?
Oh, I think the Bitcoin economy is uh, vibrant already, but it's got a long way to grow, and I'm really excited about that. Um, there are so many different things that people use Bitcoins for. Your listeners might be familiar with this. There was a survey that came out from the website Zero Hedge. They put up a Bitcoin survey and they asked, what are your demographics and what do you use Bitcoins for? And there were some interesting results from that survey. Not a scientific poll, it's all online. So, anybody can answer. And there's probably some element of self selection with the readers of that blog, right? But what people said was that the most common use of Bitcoins was actually as donations. About
Right.
55% or something like that, between 50 and 60% had used Bitcoins for donations, and less than 10% had bought drugs online, as is the commonly repeated refrain in the press that these are just,
Mm.
these sketchy underground black market activities, hiring hitmen and prostitutes and buying drugs and so forth. But that's not really true. A lot of them were used for donations. And there are Bitcoin charities. There's actually a website, Bitcoin 100, that is trying to get Bitcoins to accept charities, and they'll set you up with a wallet if you have a charity, and also give you $1,000 worth of Bitcoin donations. So there's definitely a sort of a thriving charity or nonprofit sector in the Bitcoin economy. There are people who accept Bitcoins for any number of services. I actually do freelance voiceover work, and I love getting paid in Bitcoins because it's just so easy. You don't have to
Right.
deal with any PayPal hassle. You send them, they're there. It's super easy.
And you're also involved in a charity that's exclusively being run on Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's free aid, and it's fr33aid.com if you want to find out more about that. We were in the legacy banking system for quite a while, and PayPal locked down our account twice, which was really frustrating because we couldn't focus on trying to help support people who provide first aid. We had to instead try to deal with these banking issues. So it can be really distracting sometimes for charities, but Bitcoin really alleviates that. So yeah, there's a lot of different uses for Bitcoins, and what am I forgetting here? Oh yeah, so I went to this Bitcoin conference this weekend, and gosh, Jake, there are just so many Bitcoin startups popping up. And I know,
I'll bet.
This is a time of real excitement. It almost is reminiscent a little bit of the dot-com era.
Mm.
There's tons of venture capital flowing into Bitcoin startups right now, and not all of those startups are going to succeed. We have to keep that in mind.
Mm.
But there are some really interesting and innovative products that are coming out that are making it easier to use Bitcoins, easier to get Bitcoins. There's just all kinds of innovation coming out in that area, and there's a lot of people who are wanting to invest in it. And I think they're onto something. There are some big returns potentially there. The real wild card is sort of what the government does and doesn't do to Bitcoin. Personally, I think the best thing they could do is step out of the way and leave it alone. And frankly, as a decentralized peer-to-peer network, they may not be able to stop it, and in the same sense that you can't stop BitTorrent and you can't stop the internet.
Yeah.
In the dot-com era, people weren't saying, oh, well, maybe there were some people actually saying, oh, we need to regulate the internet. Well, you can't really regulate the internet. I mean, I guess you could try to apply pressure at some points if you're a government, but it's going to be pretty difficult. So I see a lot of that going on, and I also see that these startups are popping up, in an environment of relative freedom, up to this point. It's important to remember that. And B, because they see so many unmet needs in the Bitcoin space for consumers. And that's what they're trying to do, is meet those needs. And so there really is just so much potential. And thinking about where Bitcoin was last year at this time, I can't even imagine what it's going to be like next year at this time, because the pace of growth is so huge.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think the other side of the what you can buy with Bitcoin is selling things for Bitcoin. And you mentioned before that you accept donations on both Pork Therapy, your podcast, and also for your for Free Aid, the charity you're involved in, and that you've been working for voiceover work for Bitcoin. And I have just started accepting donations in Bitcoin from the Voluntary Life. And in fact, thank you again for the very first Bitcoin donation from Stephanie.
Yay!
And so I think what I wanted to just sort of get your thoughts on is, especially for people who are planning to be location independent, doing online work and so forth, it just seems to be a really, really interesting opportunity as a medium to get paid in for work that you do.
Yes, and actually, this is increasing all the time, and it's not like if you go to any city in the world, you're going to find that you can pay all your living expenses in Bitcoin yet. However, it is getting closer to that reality. And there was a reporter recently, Kashmir Hill, who did a series of reports for Forbes, where she lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for a week on Bitcoin. And what she was able to do was pay for her lodging in Bitcoin, pay for meals in Bitcoin. There's a few restaurants and bars that do accept Bitcoin. There's one famously also in New York City. There's some in Berlin. There's some in Boston, Massachusetts. There's even some in Little Manchester, New Hampshire. So you can find places, and you can also kind of negotiate with merchants to see if they'll accept Bitcoin. There's a service called BitPay, which basically takes some of the risk associated with volatility out of accepting Bitcoins, because what they do is allow you to create a merchant account, and then you can accept Bitcoins for your products and services. They give you an API also to use on a website, for instance. And then what it'll do is you can immediately convert those Bitcoins into dollars or whatever currency you like. And so for a lot of people, they really like that service because they can still accept this alternative method of payment, but they'll still get the dollars or whatever that they want. And the fee is way lower than something like PayPal or even a credit card. The fee is 0.99%. So it's almost 1%, whereas with a credit card, you're looking at 3%, 5%, plus potentially even more. So it's a good deal for merchants to be able to accept that. And a lot of people have swung having Bitcoin payment options by persuading the merchant to get involved with BitPay. Right. So it's getting to the point where you could potentially live off of Bitcoins, which is really cool. But the other aspect of that is that up to this point, Bitcoins have been increasing in value, and so it's a deflationary currency.
Mm.
And what that means is that it really, from an economic standpoint, that's something that most of us have never seen in our lives because we've been living in these regimes with fiat currency that is inflationary. And so
Mm.
the incentive is not to save, it's to spend and to borrow and to have debt because when you repay the debt, you're going to be repaying it with cheaper dollars or euros or whatever. And so with Bitcoin, that's turned on its head. There is a real incentive to save because by historical indications, it's probably going to appreciate. Bitcoins are going to appreciate. And
Right.
so you really think about whether you want to hang on to them or whether you want to spend them and sort of really weigh that decision very carefully.
Which does give you a completely different set of incentives. It actually incentivizes frugality, which is which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Some
So
people call that hoarding, but I call it saving. I mean, how are you going to accumulate capital and become wealthy? Possibly invest in projects down the line if you don't have those incentives to save.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is such a barrier for people in life in sort of well in the West, in everywhere really, with currencies with fiat. With countries with fiat currency is that it's so hard to save because the money itself is just losing value all the time. It's leaking away, which just
Right.
rationally people think, well, why don't I just spend it? Why don't I get nice toys? Because the money's not going to be worth as much next year. And to have a system in
Yeah.
place where you're actually incentivized to think about, planning for the future, that's a really, really interesting opportunity as well.
I heard about Argentina. I don't know if you can confirm or deny this, Jake, but I heard that people are buying BMWs because it's basically an expensive object that they can convert their cash into that's not going to get touched, by the government that fits in a small space. And they're just buying them kind of for no reason except as a store of value because they can't store their value within the banking system.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't actually heard that one, but I do. I mean, that happens so much in inflationary times. People start buying art and anything that they can get their hands on that is potentially a store of value, because they just want to get rid of cash wherever they can,
Right.
because it's losing value. And it's going to be so interesting to see how Bitcoin kind of disrupts that attempt to inflate currencies from now
Yeah,
on.
and again, the change in psychology is so interesting too, because again, so many of these people have just basically grown up with an incentive to have, oh gosh, is it a low time preference or a high time preference? Basically to not plan for the future, to think in the short term. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know exactly what you're saying, and I've forgotten which one you call it actually. I think
I always
that's.
get that
I
confused.
think high time preference is when you want to spend now, but I've probably got that wrong. But anyway,
Well, we'll say they have an incentive to not plan for the future, to think in the
yes,
short term. Whereas with Bitcoin, it totally changes that because now suddenly you're thinking about the long term.
mm,
And that influences so many decisions. It's not just, pure dry and boring economics. These are decisions about life. Do I buy this house? Do I buy this car? Or do I wait? Do I save it? Do I invest in a business? Like all these decisions that are real life, living life kind of decisions are affected by the nature of whatever medium of exchange you're using. I just think that's really interesting.
absolutely. And to bring it back to what we were talking about in the beginning, this is another way that I think Bitcoin is really criticizing by creating. It's actually creating incentives. It's not just creating an alternative to the fiat currency system, but it's creating an alternative set of incentives that go along with it. So rather than incentivizing people to get into debt and spend all of their money on consumer goods, it's creating incentives for people to save and plan for the future, and that's really exciting too.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to change the world in so many ways. I mean, whether it's Bitcoin itself, which it could very well be, or whether it's something similar to Bitcoin that we haven't even seen yet, and maybe you can't even imagine yet,
Right.
uh, it's something's afoot that's going to change the world in a big way.
And it is worth saying, of course, that Bitcoin is obviously, everyone knows that it's extremely volatile, and we had the huge run up in value and then crash just recently. And so you have to deal with that. If you get involved in Bitcoin, you've got to live with the issue of volatility. And there are lots more that could be said about ways of kind of coping with that volatility. But I think it's important that to sort of have the perspective that this is really still very early days. And so, yeah, it is an extremely volatile currency at the moment.
So was there anything else you wanted to ask, or is that a good note to end on?
No, I think that's great. I would just like to get you to give your details for all of the different Bitcoin-related and other ventures that you're involved in that we talked about, and especially the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast, which I'm not sure if you've mentioned, but you are actually a co-host on probably the leading Bitcoin podcast at the moment. So why don't you give people just a summary of where they can find out more about the different ventures that you've talked about?
Awesome. Yeah. I keep meaning to make, a master website where they can find all of my projects at once, because I do have a tendency to be involved with a bunch of them at once. But the podcast you mentioned that I'm a part of is Let's Talk Bitcoin. And that is a twice weekly show about all things Bitcoin related, opinion, commentary, news, interviews with movers and shakers in the Bitcoin world. It's meant to be accessible for anybody. So whether you know nothing about Bitcoin or you know a little bit or a lot, hopefully it's enjoyable for you to listen to, and you can find it at letstalkbitcoin.com. And we're also on SoundCloud and Twitter and everything else. That's the main one I'd like to plug today, but I also have two other podcasts which I mentioned before. My show is Pork Therapy, porctherapy.com. It's a show about personal freedom. I think we have a lot of overlap with our listenership, Jake. And also Free Talk Live, which is a nationally syndicated radio show, news and commentary from a liberty-loving perspective, and that's at freetalklive.com. You can hear me on Sundays on that show. All the archives are there for free. And then also working with a Bitcoin-based charity, perhaps the world's first Bitcoin-based charity, and that's fr33aid.com. That's free aid. And you will see us if you attend the Porcupine Freedom Festival in New Hampshire coming up this summer. So I hope to see everybody there. Also at Libertopia. And Jake, I think you're going to be there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I hope that's really helpful for people who are interested in getting involved in Bitcoin.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake, for having me on. It's been my pleasure too. And I'll take us out. Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email Jake at thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed the show, please click the donate tab on thevoluntarylife.com. Is that it?
Well remembered. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jake.